Today is Friday, June 21st, and this is Celtics Beat on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio-video coverage of the Boston Celtics. I'm Adam Kaufman. Episode 320, featuring Mass Live's Tom Westerholm, is brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat and use the promo code CLNS50 and get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Today's show also brought to you in part by Quip. Go to getquip.com/Celtics to get your first refill pack for free. All right, NBA draft is behind us. Free agency is upon us, and the whole process has made me sleep-deprived, dizzy, and spending way too much time in front of a screen, but you know, we're still here for you. Some reason we love all this stuff. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Celtics Beat. Tons to cover. First, though, what you need to know since the last show last Sunday, okay? Because there has been a lot. For starters, Anthony Davis was traded to the Lakers right before the show released. That was a real kick in the nards. Really enjoyed that. But even still, I never thought Davis was coming to Boston. I've touched on that so much, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. We'll mix a little bit in later on in the show. Kyrie Irving's situation, that is incredibly fluid. In fact, the Nets reportedly are not sold on signing him as a solo act, meaning no Kevin Durant, maybe no Kyrie in Brooklyn, and then maybe the grass isn't necessarily greener elsewhere. Another thing that we'll expand upon. Al Horford opted out of his $30 million player option with the Celtics, and everyone expected that to happen. It's just the curveball after that was not quite anticipated. It's not to sign a longer deal in Boston, reportedly, at least not yet. The reports indicate that he is as good as gone, chasing a ring elsewhere, or maybe a 4-year deal elsewhere in excess of $100 million. You can just, everything comes out fast and furious this time of year. We come to expect it. And the C's fans are just devastated to the comparison of celebratory tweets anytime a report about Kyrie Irving leaving services. It's, one reaction versus another totally polar opposites. And Aaron Baines, he opted in. Of course, we knew that, but then he was traded to the Suns in a cap-clearing move draft night to free up a max slot. And if Boston does renounce everyone, including Terry Rozier, Celts right now would have almost $35 million to spend, which is way more, going back to during last season when we talked about this time of year, than we ever in a million years would have anticipated. They were supposed to be capped out with everybody coming back and no space. So there's a lot. And as for the picks, which just last night, Boston entered the draft with 4 choices and used 4 choices, just not the same 4.
With the 14th pick in the 2019 NBA Draft, the Boston Celtics select Romeo Langford from Indiana University.
Romeo Langford with a step-back jumper. Open the scoring. Here's Langford getting to the 10 and rolling it in. Langford tries the counter and does with a tough finish.
Indiana's Romeo Langford at 14. That got Marcus Smart very excited. Those two share an agent. Celtics dealt 20 to the Sixers for 24 and 33. They used 22 on Tennessee forward Grant Williams, then shipped 24. That was Ty Jerome and Baines for a top 7 Bucks pick in 2020 that Phoenix had previously possessed. At 33, C's took guard Carson Edwards out of Purdue. He's kind of Isaiah Thomas-like in that he's just, a littler guy and can score in bunches. And then at 51, Tremont Waters out of Louisiana State. So more on all this on the way, but that is a lengthy overview. I think everything is there. Tom Westerholm is here from Mass Live to help us out and also keep me in check. Did I miss anything?
You mentioned at the outset how little sleep we're all running on. If you missed anything,
you didn't catch it.
The guy to come up with it. Yeah, no. So I think you got it all.
I know there may be, and this would be a very small minority of people. It'd be like the angry Twitter people, but there might be some people out there that saw that Rick Pitino turned down an executive and coaching offer to return to Greece. He's looking for another chance in the NBA, be it as a coach, a GM, an exec. Hey, bring him back to Boston. Get rid of Ainge. Get rid of Brad. Just, burn the whole thing to the ground and start over. I don't think we want to do that, though, so let's start simple. What were your main takeaways from draft night?
Well, it's funny kind of seeing the reaction to, everything that happened. I watched a lot of film on a lot of these guys, and I actually thought the Celtics had a great draft. Grant, especially, I think that the best pick they made was Grant Williams at 22. Not that he's going to be the best player, but I think just he is so much value for them there. He's going to be a really versatile defender. I think he's going to be able to be a versatile offensive player too. He's a really, really good passer. I think he's going to be able to space to the three-point line eventually. And Romeo Langford was one of the guys that I kind of expected to see the Celtics, take a hard look at. He's kind of fits a lot of their molds. He's a guy who was really highly recruited coming out of high school, top 5 guy in his recruiting class, super long, dealt with a thumb injury all year that I think limited his shooting a bit. And obviously he still does need to work on his shooting some too. But, all things considered, with those two guys and then picking up Carson Edwards and Tremont Waters in the second round, that's a really good night. And in addition to all that, Ainge, managed to kind of leverage Philly's interest in Matisse Thybulle and pick up that extra first. So all in all, I mean, after a few disastrous days of just like free agency news that could not have possibly gone worse for this team, I thought it was a kind of a positive step for the Celtics. Just the guys they got and just the assets that they managed to acquire in the process.
You should know, by the way, the reason I enjoy having you on the show always, but the reason specifically that you are here today after this show is because I read your stuff. I know you pay way more attention to all these college kids than I do. So rather than me blabbering on about, you're the one that's actually watching a lot of tape and dissecting these guys. I will say too, for anyone that follows along on Twitter, and bless you guys that are crazy enough to do so, I had sent out a tweet during the draft that a buddy of mine, diehard Celtics fan, Seth, he sends me this the day before the draft. He said, 1 night to go, and I want Ty Jerome, Matisse Thybulle, and Goga. Those are the guys. And the Celtics end up drafting 2 of them and trading both of them effectively. couldn't have trolled him harder. And the amount of just miserable text that I was getting throughout that draft, he was so pissed off. And so I mean, at least I bring that up because at least some of the guys that you expected and wanted, they came through for you. So it worked out for you.
I mean, yeah. Well, and listen, your buddy doesn't have bad taste. I mean, those 3 are all good players. Like Goga was another guy who I really thought the Celtics. I think they probably did take a hard look at him. I'm just guessing, but I mean he's such a good pick and roll option, and obviously Thybulle is such a good defender. He's was one of the best defenders in college basketball last year. So I mean those were all good options. I honestly thought in this draft it really flattened out after kind of the top 4. I was really high on Darius Garland, but obviously he went number 5. I felt like after those guys, it really sort of flattened out to the point where I didn't feel like there was a ton of value between like picks 6 and 10, but I did feel like there was good role player and maybe a little bit more potential, basically for the rest of the draft. Like, all the way into the second round, I think Carson Edwards is a very reasonable role player. So it was a very strange draft that way where I didn't feel like there was like a ton of star power. There's probably some guys in the later first round who will develop into, something close to that. It's always difficult to predict that for sure. But I mean, this draft, I think that honestly, by kind of trading back and picking up more picks, Ainge did kind of gamble on this is a draft where we can pick up a lot of guys where the Celtics can have a bunch of players who can contribute for a while and who might be able to contribute right away. So, yeah, I mean, it was a deep draft in kind of a weird way and in sort of a roundabout way that I think is going to be really interesting to watch next season.
Well, and inevitably, and it won't be next year, and it may not be in Boston, unfortunately, if that proves to be the case years from now. But like we talk about Kawhi, we talk about Giannis. There are guys like there's going to be a guy that went 17 in this draft. There's going to be a star in this league. Like that's just the way it always is. It's flyers when you start to get into mid-round guys. So it's all a crapshoot, obviously. But there were reports, with the Celtics at 14 that they tried to trade up to number 4 to take the guy that you mentioned, Vanderbilt point guard Darius Garland, who, as you said, went 5, and David Griffin's out there wheeling and dealing and then ended up sending 4 elsewhere. Where'd it go? The Hawks, I think, if I remember right. So that, that winds up moving. Didn't work out. Mike Conley moves from Memphis to Utah, so if those dreams of Conley to Boston were ever remotely realistic, which I don't really think they were, those things died in a hurry. no real smoke on the Celtics dealing for an established star mid-draft, which was another thing that Gary Washburn had put out, trying to trade for that veteran established guy. Obviously, everybody, like I said, is a bit of a gamble. I know you like the picks on the whole. It's no real surprise that, one of my real takeaways, and I think it probably should have been everybody's, is that, with Jason Tatum, with Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, a few of the more recent high-round picks that the Celtics took, Danny Ainge, once again, and let's hear from him here, he prioritized character.
Very good guys. I mean, that played a big part into why we selected them and who they are, not just what they're capable of doing on the court. Very excited about them and their personalities and their character, and think that they have the will to become great.
All right, but will they? Okay, I mean, let's start with the self-said real smooth Romeo Langford. Okay, he's low key, not an outwardly emotional kid. In terms of just some of the facts, second team All Big Ten for the Hoosiers as a freshman, averaged almost 17 points despite playing with a torn ligament in that thumb in his shooting hand. Has since surgically been repaired. He started shooting. He should be ready for summer league. He was a terrible shooter in college, granted just the 1 year, 27% from distance, but he does think, and he might be right, the injury played a role.
Like that did affect it in a lot of ways, but really that's the main thing I'm focusing on once I get back from this surgery, be able to shoot and stuff, is really focusing on my jump shot, because I feel like that will open up my game and be a big asset to helping the team win games.
So are you buying into that as well? Is he a better shooter than the stats show?
He's a better shooter than the stats show, but that is sort of his problem area is that shot. I don't think that it's unreasonable to think that he'll, have a much improved season just from having a fixed thumb, but I wouldn't expect him to come out just like blazing, shooting 40% from three just because his thumb is fixed. Like, this is something that has been a little bit of an issue, and it's going to be something that he really has to work on. But the Celtics have had some success with developing guys, into shooters. I mean, Jaylen obviously, turned himself into a very reasonable spot-up guy, and basically a spot-up three is all Langford needs to be a pretty effective player offensively. He does get to the rim really well. He gets to the free throw line really well, which Danny talked about a little bit, and he, said that wasn't necessarily the reason that they drafted him, but I'm sure it's a nice plus given all the struggles they had getting to the line last year. I think all things considered, I think he's probably going to struggle from three in his, first couple of seasons, but I think that as he develops that, that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why the Celtics look at some of these guys who have versatility, but who maybe can't shoot. You can develop a shot. And I think with Langford, the combination of being healthy and also, having all this development, all this attention on him, they're going to give him a lot of time, a lot of attention as a lottery pick and as a guy with his kind of potential. So, I think there's good reason to be hopeful that he can, get himself into like the mid 30s, maybe like 37, 38, if you're being optimistic. But yeah, I do think it's going to be a process, and I don't think the surgery itself is just going to fix it right away.
And that's pretty close to where Marcus Smart lived last year from three-point range. It took a few years, as we know. I was one of the holdouts that believed like he's going to be able to shoot. I can see it. I think he's going to be able to shoot, and we'll find out in time if last year was a fluke or not. But I don't think it was. I think he's found something and will continue to improve. And who knows? Maybe my grand proclamation from 2 years ago that he can be Kyle Lowry one day will come true. But I won't get overly optimistic about that.
Well, and you don't have to get overly optimistic, but Brad Stevens agrees with you. He said all year like he expected Marcus to be a better shooter last year, but then obviously there was the hand injury and then just a bunch of other stuff that went on with him. So I mean, yeah, I think that was a reasonable guess at the time, and I think that you have some good company in thinking that.
Yeah, I think that Brad and I we tend to be on the same page. I don't think he's a big fan of Kyrie Irving on the Celtics either. But Grant Williams, though, let's talk about him. As you said, your favorite pick among the crew, and I can understand why. Even without watching him on the floor, I can understand why. He just seems like a really great dude. I enjoy listening to him. But second first-round pick for this team. He's a bright kid, high basketball IQ, high intellect in general. He chose Tennessee over Harvard and Yale, which I didn't realize until I read that. I thought that was really interesting. His mom for people who don't know, is an engineer at NASA, which actually led to a great moment with Shams Charania at Stadium a couple of months ago.
There have been different theories. People have controversially said stuff. Kyrie Irving said the Earth is flat. There have been different things going on in outer space. Do you have a conspiracy theory? Do you have a smart theory based on what you already know?
Well, with my mom, I don't really think of theories, so I kind of know for sure what's what. So it's kind of nice to have that mindset, but I just can't really share it.
What's the big thing that you can debunk, if there is anything that you hear a lot, you hear people say a lot, but you're like, that's scientifically not true?
Kyrie's Earth is flat theory is just scientifically not true. But that's the one thing I can debunk, if we're being pretty honest, because it's just not true at all.
I want them to share a locker room so badly now. Grant Williams with his, that Kyrie Irving is a freaking idiot moment from a couple of months ago, which was great. So obviously Kyrie's definitely leaving now. If he wasn't before, he definitely is. But, Williams, he can play. First team All-American as a junior, two-time SEC Player of the Year, 19 points a game, led the conference, good shooter. Everyone was talking about this when he was drafted. Strong as an ox. He's, Shemi Ojale-like in that way, and Brad Stevens absolutely raved about him. So how's he fit in, though? Just beyond all the things that I mentioned, actually putting him out there on the floor with this team and this mix, this roster, how's he fit in?
I think he's going to be a great fit. He talked a little bit about when asked him about his versatility, and the first guy he mentioned was Al Horford. I think when you look at the way that he's going to be able to pass, and I think he's going to be able to space the floor, I think there's going to actually be a lot of similarities there. Just in the way that he can. And the other thing that he really does well is screen, that not a lot of people aren't necessarily talking about, is like the screens that Al Horford sets, that really free guys up, and they're kind of quasi-legal. Williams can kind of do a similar thing. Like he's so big, he's so strong. If you run into him or if he makes contact with you, you're gonna feel it. It's gonna knock you out of sort of out of your motion. And I think that stuff is gonna really play a big role. I would not be surprised at all if he, again, similar to Al, is sort of a guy where he isn't gonna put up. He's definitely not going to put up like 25 points and 13 rebounds, but he might have just like a great plus minus, because when he was on the floor, he kind of made everything run around him. He defended really well. He, set all the good screens that pops guys open for threes. A very much a little things type of guy, which does kind of play into his, this high basketball IQ that he has. Like he understands what he needs to do on the floor to help the team be successful. And, I thought it was funny that last night, he was talking about Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And one, I thought it was funny that he called them vets, which,
compared to him, I guess, right?
It's crazy to think about, but if Terry Rozier doesn't come back, those two are going to be the second and third longest tenured Celtics.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it was funny to hear him say that, but it was also funny to hear him say, he wants to be able to be the defender who stops everything and sort of takes the load off of Jaylen and Tatum so that those guys can go get buckets. I think that's having that type of mentality. He's only 20 years old. He's so smart. He sounds just like way ahead of his time. He was a junior at Tennessee, but he's a 20-year-old, and he's talking in his opening press conference about how he wants to make it easier for, the guys that he kind of sees as the Celtic stars. I think that's really promising just from a mentality perspective, that he's going to come in. I think he's going to be a great locker room guy. And like you had mentioned, all of us in the media are going to have a great time talking to him because he's incredibly personable, just very thoughtful, and that type of guy is very popular among us in the media.
But does this mean now that we're going to have to see that, R. Williams and G. Williams jerseys out there on the floor, or can we just petition for Roberts to be changed to Time Lord at this point?
I think Celtics fans would be super into it.
They would sell so many.
I think Rob is still kind of hesitant on the Time Lord thing. I think he's
but doesn't he also hate being called Rob? Isn't that a thing?
Well, he hates being called Bob. You can't call him Bob. You can call him Robert, or you can call him Rob.
Okay.
And when I talked to him about Time Lord earlier in the season, he said, "Yeah, I don't think it's going to catch on unless my coaches start calling me that." And then later in the season, I heard a couple of his coaches calling him that. So He might be stuck with it.
That poor bastard underestimated Celtics Twitter.
He really did. He underestimated the rips, man. But I can't imagine how much money the Celtics would make by having a Time Lord 44 jersey.
Quick break to tell you today's show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. NBA season's over, sure, but doesn't mean you can't go out and still make some cash on basketball. You can already bet on who's going to win the title in 2020. Lakers plus 350, which I think is ridiculous. Again, need more talent on that team. Fill out the roster. Just the two-headed monster of two guys that, at least over the last year, have trouble staying healthy. I'm not sure that's who I would bank on. You can do it. Celtics are plus 1,200, which probably seems like a silly bet, but then again, maybe Danny Ainge goes out and makes a splash, as we've talked about, and sets you up to make a whole boatload of money down the road. You can also make custom player bets during games. You can pick a player, a stat. BetOnline.ag will give you a line for it. Just one of the great things that BetOnline.ag offers you. So make sure you go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Celtics get a 50% bonus when you sign up and use the promo code CLNS50. Don't be left on the sideline with all this excitement going on the court. Plus, you can play in BetOnline's virtual casino. Make some money there, too. Plus, you always have futures bets to play. MLB season, that's in full swing. NFL futures are already out. A lot going on in the sporting world. Whatever you do, make sure you use betonline.ag and use the promo code CLNS50 for a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Or just go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Let's get back to Tom. All right, well, so second round, and we won't spend as long on these guys, but Carson Edwards, 24 games as a junior at Purdue. He was Player of the Year finalist, couple 40-point games in the NCAA tournament, almost single-handedly knocked out a team in, I don't remember which round it was. You can expand on that. But he shoots well. Is he ready, though, to contribute offensively off the bench at this level if the team is, in fact, thin at guard as it is right now? Or is he someone that you think is more realistically ticketed for Maine?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually kind of the perfect role for him, is just kind of coming off the bench and being sort of a microwave guy who, spaces the floor, hits some threes. With him, you really want to have him next to like a Marcus Smart or a Gordon Hayward, somebody who can facilitate a little bit more, because he's not necessarily that type of point guard. He's sort of an undersized, quite undersized shooting guard. So if you can put him next to Smart and just tell him, listen, go score some points. Marcus will handle getting everybody else involved, and or Gordon will handle bringing the ball up, and sort of jump starting everything. I do think that is kind of his perfect role in that way. He wouldn't have necessarily been my pick at 33. Obviously, Danny and Dave Lewin and Mike Zarin, these guys are all very smart. I'm sure they had all these conversations. I think there were a couple of other options who might have made a little bit more. I don't know if I want to say more sense, because Edwards is kind of did kind of fill a need there in terms of a guy who can score as a lead guard, but. He is going to score, and he's going to hit threes, and he's probably going to get to the free throw line and get to the rim a little bit. We've seen, obviously people are going to want to make the IT comparisons, and that's a tough comparison to live up to for a rookie. But Brad is really good at utilizing scoring lead ball handlers who they come off these pin down screens in the corner. They come around these dribble handoffs. Brad really knows how to utilize guys like Edwards, and I think we're going to see that. I think that Edwards he's going to be a really nice piece off the bench for the Celtics. And, I think Brad is going to enjoy having him in his system.
Who did you want at 33 then, if not him?
Well, there were a few guys that were still on the board. I've been very high on a guy who wasn't even drafted. Louis King out of Oregon is a guy that
there's still a chance.
I think I can't even remember with all the stuff that happened immediately after the draft. I think somebody picked him up on an undrafted deal, but he was a guy that I would have taken a hard look at. 6'9", like just a wing who can handle the ball and shoot and really score in a lot of different ways. He was an intriguing guy. Honestly, at this point, it's hard to remember everybody who was on and off the board at that point. Edwards was a little bit lower on mine because I don't think he has a ton of defensive potential. But, that wasn't necessarily what they were going for with him. They were going for that offense, and I can definitely understand that mentality as well.
I'll tell you one guy who was still on the board because it's who I wanted, and that's Bol Bol. I wanted the chance. I wanted the flyer. I mean, the guy, who knows? He could have been or could be another Fab Melo. May he rest in peace, by the way. Or maybe he could be like Minute. We don't know. But I'm enamored with adding a guy of that stature to the team. I was really intrigued by that. I was hoping that, once the Celtics passed on him at 33, hey, maybe he'll be there at 51. I think he went 44 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, he hung around for a little while. Hell, wasn't he the only guy that was still left in the green room for, after the first round, basically?
Yeah, I mean,
poor guy.
I think Nick Claxton was around at 31, so, he didn't have to hang around for very long. But, yeah, I mean, it was – that's one of my least favorite things about draft night is seeing those poor guys who, thought they were going to get picked in the first round and then, stuff happens. I am very, very low on Bol. I think that he's going to really, really struggle defensively in the NBA, and you better have if you're going to have him on your team, you better have like a perfect type of like power forward around him who can protect the rim and who can switch everything. He's so frail. Just his build is really, really, really skinny. And I think guards are going to be able to go right through him. I think bigs are going to be able to go right through him. There's a lot of issues, and reportedly there were a lot of medical questions about him as well.
Guy that size.
Yeah,
exactly. Not real, knee problems, foot problems, who knows what else. Mm-hmm. Back problems, like all that stuff. Inevitable. Go ahead.
And I mean, and he does have, all these intriguing. Obviously, he can shoot the ball, really, really well. He's very fluid, very mobile for a guy that size. You don't see that very often. But I just think when your center is going to be that much of a defensive liability, and offensively he's so raw, you really need a guy like that who really, really wants to be great, really wants to be an all-star. And then there's questions about kind of his desire and how much he actually likes the game, which can be a little bit overrated, but I think in tandem with all the other stuff is kind of concerning. So I know there was people were clamoring for Bol with the number 14 pick, and right. I always thought that was a pretty major reach. But I wasn't too surprised to see him slide, but he would have. I think he's going to struggle a little bit at the next level. Let's put it that way.
So, readily admitting that it's June 21st right now, free agency hasn't even started yet. So much can happen in regard to signings, trades, whatever. But there were a ton of reports and just common logic that said Celtics don't want to have 3 rookies on the roster next year. And as we talk right now, sounds like 3 rookies on the roster next year. I mean, I don't think Tremont Waters is going to be there. He's going to be in the G League, and we don't even really need to talk about him. He was picked at 51. No disrespect to Mr. Waters, but the other 3 project, I would think, to be on the team. So do we have an indication of what the Celtics' plan is after draft night? Did we gain any clarity from last night and listening to Danny Ainge and Wick Grossbeck and Brad Stevens, and I'll give some sound from some of those guys in a little bit, or is everything just still so fluid that it's just, hey, this is where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was funny. I thought Danny actually kind of accidentally said a couple of things that, or maybe not accidentally, maybe very intentionally, I don't know. But I think he did actually kind of give a couple of hints. Like, for instance, when he said, we've always, when guys leave, there's always opportunities for other guys. I thought that was pretty clearly, all right, well, this is Jason's team now.
Right.
But I thought, obviously he couldn't talk about much. I always kind of wondered about that. The Celtics don't want to have 3 rookies on the team thing. I mean, it was the kind of leak that almost makes me wonder if, Danny is trying to get something out there. And obviously, before the draft, there's all kinds of smoke all the time. You really have to try to parse through everything. I did kind of wonder if, maybe, the Celtics trying to package to move up. They liked some of the guys late in the draft because they picked up an extra pick in the second round, which ended up being Carson Edwards. So, I would expect these guys to end up on the roster. I don't think that these guys are getting traded, at least not immediately. I think that this is going to be a young team. Obviously, we saw Baines get shipped out last night. I think that they're kind of going all in, or at least semi all in on the youth, and kind of seeing what they have, seeing what they can fit around Tatum and Brown, and I think that they'll try to bring in free agents that still make them competitive. I don't think that they're going to try to tank and, get James Wiseman next year in 2020 or anything like that. But I do think that they are willing to, sort of give the reins to some young guys, see what they can build, see what they have, and kind of go from there. I think that, having 3 picks, using 3 picks the way they did, that kind of puts them in a position to just take a look, zero in. How do these guys fit around Tatum? What does Tatum need? What should we go out and get for Tatum, in the next year or two, and kind of go from there? Because, this still could be a good team, but obviously it's not going to be a contender in the near future.
Well, beyond the new kids, there is a lot of uncertainty, as we just started to outline anyway. And here's owner Wyc Grousbeck. He knows that.
Building or retooling, listen, you're starting with a core of Marcus Smart, Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. Start with that and then add in the rest of the roster, not to slight anybody, and then restricted rights on Terry and possibilities with our free agents. I got to tell you, it's a good time to be trying to retool like this, but on the other hand, the season ended on a down note. I have no confusion about that. We won 5 and then lost 4, not satisfactory, but here we are. We're trying to keep moving forward.
Grousbeck chatted with NBC Sports Boston. Now, Jackie McMullen had brought up not long ago just the fact that everything basically that could have gone wrong since the Kyrie Irving trade has. He and Gordon Hayward got hurt 5-15 into their first year. Hayward goes down for the year. Irving eventually went down about 3/4 of the way through. Irving, the following year, destroys team chemistry. The kids, if you will, the egos get too big from the deep playoff run without the stars. Hayward, in year 2, never really finds the consistency or confidence he needed to be himself again, and hopefully we see it this coming year. Horford, we talked about it. He may be gone. The Kings pick landed at 14, which is why the Celtics were there last night and not number 2 in a perfect world. Davis goes to L.A. It's basically a 30 for 30 in all the worst possible ways, and I kind of hope someday somebody makes it. But I'm also not sure that the era's over, and I don't think that's me just hanging on to an old take. I think there's a lot of logic that could be found within that. The 2 biggest dominoes are still Kyrie Irving and Al Horford, and it's not the odds-on favorite situation for a wide variety of reasons, but I don't personally believe that the door is closed on those 2 returning if some of the other stuff that has been out there is true. Like, as I said earlier, the Nets not being sold on Irving as a solo act. Now, maybe that just means he goes to the Lakers as a third wheel. Maybe it means he goes to the Knicks and he's still closer to home, and Boston is 4th on that list. Maybe Boston's not even on that list. I don't know. Horford, maybe the 4-year deal isn't actually out there. Maybe the $100 million deal is not actually out there. Maybe, like I said earlier, the grass is not greener for those 2 guys, especially when you listen to, A. Sherrod had a report that Horford could follow Kyrie to Brooklyn. Well, where in the hell is the motivation in doing that, especially if Irving was so bad to be around? And Irving going to Brooklyn by himself, that's not a better situation than Boston, aside from, again, proximity to where he grew up. So I'll say it again. I don't think the door is closed on those 2. Do you?
It's a good question, especially like you mentioned in light of Brooklyn potentially not wanting just Kyrie. I do kind of wonder, the Celtics did kind of make, I don't want to call them teardown moves. They're not teardown moves. They made moves that they would make if those guys were gone. I think trading Baines for, not much. That's a I think these guys are gone type of move. I think that like we were talking about, I think drafting 3 rookies that it looks like are all going to be on the roster next year. Obviously they can still try to find a trade. They can still try to find something to build around differently if, Irving and Horford did decide to stick around. But, I do think that Horford is going to get something big that will be difficult for the Celtics to match, especially if Kawhi ends up in with the Clippers. I mean, he and Kawhi would just be such a perfect combo, and the Clippers have the money to make it work. And then I think I just have a hard time seeing Kyrie come back. I think that there is a lot of bad blood. It certainly feels that way. It doesn't really feel like things ended on the right note. It feels like there's been some, just even if you just kind of go through the social media, it feels like there's been a little bit of sniping. Like I can't tell if Jaylen the other day with his post about, he'd rather walk than ride with bad company. Like you can't, like it could be anything. It could be completely separate from that. But I mean, the timing certainly felt like, something. Marcus Smart saying that he would. I don't remember who tweeted it out, but he quote tweeted somebody saying that he should start by saying, essentially that he agrees.
Yeah, that was a Keith Smith tweet.
Yeah. So I mean, I think they're both gone. I have a hard time. I can see the rationale why. Let's put it this way: I can see the rationale why Kyrie should want to come back, but just Kyrie being Kyrie, I don't think he will. I think that he is sort of, obviously he changes his mind some, but I don't know that he's going to change his mind on Boston. I think he's kind of fed up, and I think he wants something new. And we'll see if that new thing is a better situation. Like you said, Brooklyn by himself, Brooklyn is not a better situation. Celtics still have a ton of talent on this team. But I think that he's gone. I think that he's sort of made up his mind about that, just from all the reports and from all the smoke that's been around him recently. And, Horford, I think he wants to try to win a championship, and you can't blame him. Like, he's 33. He did everything he could here. And, for all the reasons that you outlined, like, everything just kind of went wrong. And, I don't think that this team is going to be a championship contender next year. I think they'll be pretty good, but Horford, I think, could be excused for wanting to play not only for a championship team or, if the Dallas Mavericks are going to offer him $100 million, he has to take that. Like, there's just no question about it. So, personally, I think both those guys are gone. But, these next 10 days are going to be crazy. A lot of stuff can happen, and you certainly don't want to make any pronouncements that you can't take back. So, yeah, you can see just about anything happening, but personally, I would expect the Celtics to be working with a very new roster next year.
Yeah, that in and of itself, by the way, is why this show is coming out on an unusual Friday as opposed to the normal Sundays, because I didn't want to record now, release it on Sunday, and who the hell knows what happens in the 48 hours in between. We ran into that last week with the stupid Anthony Davis trade. But, the one bit of clarity at least Ainge gave us in talking with NBC Sports Boston, there were those reports, conflicting reports, about whether Irving had been actually ghosting the Celtics or whether he was regularly in touch. And this is what Ainge had to say.
Kyrie's been good. He's returned calls. He's returned messages. He's been excellent. Kyrie has always been respectful with me. Our one-on-one relationship has been good, and he's been open and honest with me from day one. So I have no issues at all with Kyrie.
So Irving's been in Japan based on his Instagram. He's been working on this documentary back home. He is starting with the new agent soon, Rock Nation. We don't know if he even knows definitively what he wants right now because, again, we've all said it for months. Like, it's impossible to get inside this dude's head in any way, shape, or form. But there were the reports, and you alluded to this, about how poorly he got along with some of the younger guys in the room last year. Chris Mannix did a radio interview recently, said his relationship with Jaylen Brown was the worst, and maybe that speaks to Brown's Instagram post that you referenced. If Irving did return, and again, long shot anyway, but entertaining it for a second, does that mean that Brown is on the trade block? Like, basically, would Ainge be having to choose between those two guys based on how bad it reportedly was last year?
I don't know that it would be necessarily Jaylen on the trading block because those two don't get along. I think that Jaylen would probably be on the trading block because the Celtics would need a different look. Like, I just think we saw what happened last year, and obviously there were extenuating circumstances. Maybe Gordon Hayward is back, to 90% of himself, 95% of himself, and if he is, the Celtics were great when he was good last year. So maybe that just fixes everything. But I just kind of think that if Kyrie did come back, I think trading Jaylen for like a piece that fits a little bit better around Kyrie, maybe like a more veteran presence, something like that. I think that would make the most sense. Just for everybody involved, for Jaylen, who is, going to be due a new contract soon and who would probably like an opportunity to shine a little bit more. And, for Kyrie, who, if he came back, presumably would be hoping to play for a contender. And look, you can get something really, really good for Jaylen Brown. He's a great young prospect. He's going to be he's going to be a really, really nice player for somebody. And I think a lot of people highly value him. So, I wouldn't necessarily say I think that I don't know for sure. I don't know that their issues are so bad that they, can't even be in the same room together or anything like that. They always seemed pretty friendly in the locker room together. You never really, you would definitely see the two of them joking around every once in a while. But I just think, like, from a basketball fit perspective, it would make a lot of sense to if Kyrie came back to at least, test the waters, see what you might be able to get for, a really good young player like Jaylen Brown.
If the seemingly inevitable comes true and that's Irving's gone, is Terry Rozier the favorite to be back, or do you think that there's the Bradley Beal pursuit people talk about? D'Angelo Russell, provided Kyrie goes to Brooklyn, he would seemingly be out and then available, and I know he had the Instagram post about his guy Langford there. Drew Holiday is a name that's just sort of floated around, or maybe another veteran guard. Or are any of those secondary options, not secondary in talent, but secondary as in I mentioned them after, are those guys priorities over Rozier, or is Rozier the favorite?
That's like the $1 million question at this point. I think you have to say that Rozier is probably the favorite, if only because he is a restricted free agent, and if the Celtics sort of project that they do plan to match, I think they can get him for a really good deal. And I think my Mass Live co-beat writer John Corrales had a good point the other day that you can also go to Terry and say, listen, we'll sign you for we'll offer you 2 years, call it $30 million, call it whatever you want, just one of those 1+1 deals that pays you really, really well in the short term. That might be attractive for Terry, who would then have an opportunity to start to maybe lock in some more money long term. He'd be able to potentially opt out, and it would also give the Celtics a lot of salary to work with if they were trying to make a trade. If you sign Terry to a $15 million a year deal, for a couple of years, maybe you can trade Terry and the Memphis pick for somebody really good who's on a higher salary, where if you didn't have Terry, maybe you would have to include Marcus Smart. So I think that would be an option with him. I think kind of those two things, that kind of confluence of factors might make him sort of the favorite. But, I think they're going to look at a lot of stuff, though. It's certainly, there's been a lot of buzz on, Celtics Twitter about D'Angelo Russell. I don't know how likely that is, but I think they're going to look at a lot of things. I think if you were just like picking a favorite right now, or if you were betting on it, I think that Terry is probably the safest bet, just because almost like a convenience thing. Like it kind of makes a lot of sense. It gives him an opportunity to shine that he's been really really wanting. But yeah, I think that basically everything's on the table at this point.
One more quick break to tell you today's show is brought to you by Quip. I'm sure all of you are almost done with your spring cleaning, considering summer is finally here. In fact, I think today's the first day of summer. But one thing that you need to work on all the time, every single month, you got to clean your mouth. Month. Really, I would do it every day. Month doesn't seem nearly often enough. And in 2 minutes, you can get the best clean ever just by signing up for Quip. Quip uses sensitive sonic vibrations to give you the best clean of your life. Most people brush too hard. I know I do. Electric toothbrushes, they can be abrasive. They can be aggressive. Just give your mouth the gentle clean it needs. Have it feel good. 90% of people don't brush for the full 2 minutes. Quip is designed to help you. Pulses every 30 seconds to remind you to switch it up. It's time to upgrade your game to the toothbrush backed by over 25,000 professionals. Get Quip today. Get your first refill on us. Just go to getquip.com/Celtics. That is getquip.com/Celtics. Let's get back to the show. Well, again, as we just sort of follow the tea leaves and assuming Horford is gone, now that Baines is out as well, Boston needs bigs. The starting center right now is Robert Williams, that's not going to happen. I love this exchange between Danny and Sherrod Blakely.
Well, most of the players have been measured, and so we know how tall they are. And we will seek out the ones that are tall, that we have a need of. What do you mean, my approach?
Specific skills that you're looking for as you go about looking for bigs that you would like to bring into the fold?
Yeah, defend other bigs, rebound, pass, shoot. Yeah, all the things that big guys do on the basketball court. There's a whole bunch of variety. We have no clarity in who we're getting yet, right? We can't talk to free agents until July 1st. So we have a long list of bigs, and we'll make a priority list and go from there.
One of my highlights of draft night was definitely just how many questions Danny Ainge felt were dumb. Like, why are you asking me that right now? You know full well I can't and won't answer it. Nevertheless, question after question. They weren't even bad questions. It was just, I'm not touching these.
Yeah.
I'm not going to touch them, and I don't know how you guys don't know that by now. But it was pretty funny. But anyway, like I said, they need a starting center, and we keep hearing about Nick Vucevic now. Woj has had that. Shams has had that, both of them right after the draft. Clint Capella has been mentioned, of course, going on weeks now. Steven Adams could be a short-term option that doesn't disrupt future cap space, kind of on a 2-year deal type situation. He's young. I know his body's kind of broken, but he is young. I have personally, since the day he was not drafted by the Celtics, fantasized about Julius Randle. What's realistic among that group, or maybe somebody else, and who's a good fit?
Well, I mean, a lot of very reliable people are mentioning Vucevic, which, I think he's obviously an extremely talented player. He had a great season last year, all-star season, 20-12 type of player. He's tortured the Celtics in the past, so you can understand why they went out and got Greg Monroe, who did the same thing. So, I mean, he's one option that you mentioned. The thing that I would kind of keep an eye on, I wonder how much the Celtics are going to be willing to tie up future flexibility, and how much they want to go all in on the current core without sort of seeing what it is. Like, to me, it would make a lot of sense to kind of go into the season. Obviously, as much as Robert Williams has a lot of promise, obviously you would need to get a starting center somewhere. But I do kind of wonder if it makes sense to, give Vucevic like a 4-year max deal, lock in all of that money when you don't necessarily know what Jalen and Tatum are going to need if those are the guys that you're building around. Like, you don't know for sure that what they need is a scoring big who, struggles a little bit defensively but grabs a lot of rebounds. Like, maybe they need, a rim protector. Maybe they need somebody who spaces the floor, kind of exclusively. Like, you just don't know what is going to be a good fit around them. And if you go out and you give a guy a 4-year deal, you're committing to 4 years of that guy. Basically, you're committing to that guy for as long as you are going to have, sort of team control over Tatum and Jalen. So, to me, it makes a little bit of sense to sort of see what you have. Maybe try to, if you need to swing something, maybe try to do something around the trade deadline. And for the time being, just kind of get like a serviceable starter. But Danny obviously has a plan. The Celtics obviously have a plan, and if they feel like Vucevic is an option, I think that he's obviously talented. He would obviously bring a lot to the team, and I think he would help this team become a more dangerous team in the playoffs. But I don't know. I just don't know how much they're going to be willing to commit in the long term. That is one of the reasons, incidentally, that I think that Julius Randle makes a little bit more sense. I think you could go to Randle, like I was saying with Rozier. I think you might be able to go to Randle and say, hey, do you want 2 years really, really well paid? You'll be able to start, you'll be sort of the focus of our bigs. You'll have this opportunity to really prove yourself, and then you can get back out there with a lot of money in your pocket and also, a chance to make more. Something like that would make a little bit more sense to me than committing 4 years to, a guy with a lot of defensive question marks like Vucevic.
Yeah, I wonder, just kind of looking at that grouping, especially after what you said, all those guys I mentioned really require some sort of a hefty commitment. Maybe it's years, maybe it's money on the short term, like you said with Randle. So when you say go out and get a serviceable starter, and because obviously you need someone to start the year, it's not going to be, Bob over there. Who do you have in mind? Who are the available free agents that you say this guy would be a good fit, and he's not going to hamstring you in any way?
It's a really good question, because my answer would have been, well, just keep Baines.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that my guess is that that's not what they're thinking. My guess is that they're thinking, like, let's make a, sort of a bigger commitment. But, I mean.
Although if Baines does get waived by Phoenix, could he come back?
I don't actually know the cap machinations of that. Like, I don't know if that would be allowed. Like, they just traded. I'm guessing there would have to be, like, a waiting period.
There'd have to be a waiting period for sure. I also don't think he'd want to. He'd want to go to a team that he believes is a contender. But I don't know. I'm throwing it out there.
That might not trade him when he opts in.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I think he would have made some sense. I mean, I don't know, like a Dwayne Dedman maybe, guys like that. Just sort of guys who can play, guys who are fairly unspectacular. A bunch of people have said it now. I don't know who said it first, but center is kind of becoming the mercenary position in the NBA, where, for the most part, you're not building around that guy. Obviously, you do if you have Joel Embiid, guys like that. But for the most part, these are guys that you sort of bring in to complement your other guys and to sort of, defend and grab rebounds. So that's where I would, that's how I would spend that money if I was the Celtics. But, I think them trading Baines does sort of suggest something. I think that probably means that they're going to take a swing of some kind, whether it's long-term money, whether it's short-term, big money, whatever it is. It does kind of seem like they're gearing up for something along those lines.
So you put out all sorts of roster building content on Mass Live, obviously. You and, as you said, John Corrales, you guys do that all the time. And Ainge, he still believes in this program.
We have a very attractive franchise to play for, and there's a lot of people that will be dying to come play here.
We've gotten to some of the specifics of this, and we've danced around other elements of it, but without sitting there with the calculator, I know you don't have that handy, and so much is fresh after freeing up more space in the wake of trades. But how do you think the Celtics should spend their available cap space? You're Danny Ainge, you're Mike Zarin, and again, you don't need to get to the dollar, but just in general, what is your approach with what exists right now, the core that Grossbeck mentioned earlier, and what you have at your disposal?
Yeah, so everything that I would do if I were the Celtics right now would just be like, what complements Tatum? Like, I think this season, the whole thing is, how good can this guy be? Like, is he going to be Paul George? Like, is he going to be like a superstar small forward who, all NBA second team, all NBA first team? Is that going to be this guy, or is he going to be like a Tobias Harris who's very good, very solid, might make a couple All-Star teams? Like, where is Tatum going to be? Like, and I think this is the year you sort of establish that. And to do that, I think that you put pieces around him, and Jaylen Brown, a similar thing where, like, see what he is, see what you've got in him. That would be what I would do with all these guys. I would take a hard look. I wrote about this on Mass Live. I would at least kick the tires on somebody like Bojan Bogdanovic. I think that his floor spacing would be really nice next to those guys. He wouldn't be somebody who takes up a lot of possessions if you don't need him to, but he can if you do need him to. And I think that, obviously he's another wing. Who knows what's going to happen with Gordon Hayward? Who knows how good he's going to be this year? He might be very, very good. He might be just basically what he was last year. So somebody like Bogdanovic, I think, would be intriguing. I wrote about Randall as well. He was on sort of my list of guys who, not only is he a fit positionally, he's also kind of a fit on the timeline. Like, he's still a young guy. He's obviously very mobile. He can do a lot of things, and you kind of hope that he will be able to continue to improve as a shooter. Shot like 34% from three last year. So, those would be two guys that I would take a look at. And I think, obviously, you really have to figure out the point guard situation. I think Marcus Smart can be your starting point guard if that's the way you want to go. But, you better be sure because, you still have the restricted rights to Terry. So I think that my priority would be picking up, if I were Danny Ainge, my priority would be picking up like good players on high money, short-term deals, just to keep my flexibility. And with those guys, it would be guys that I think complement Tatum and Brown and would give me a chance to build around them and understand how realistic building around them really is.
Hindsight is everything, and we're in the early stages of it with regard to AD. I mentioned we couldn't touch on that trade last week. Shipped to the Lakers for a haul of young talent, mostly future picks. Just a treasure chest that continues to get better even in the wake of draft night. David Griffin was just such the perfect hire over there. The Celts were never going to match a deal like that. Should not have, by the way, and reportedly weren't willing to part with Tatum, at least not Tatum and the Memphis pick in the same deal, but mostly Tatum, I think, and I never thought he was going to, and I didn't think that Ainge was going to go all in, and kind of got beaten up along the way about that, but sure enough, he didn't. So everyone is now fawning over L.A., odds makers and all that. I'm personally not sold on them, at least as currently constituted. I don't think LeBron, an aging LeBron, who missed a lot of time to injury last year, maybe that will prove to be a good thing for him. AD, who is always injury-prone, elite player when he's on, but when he's off, he's invisible. Kyle Kuzma, who's, obviously a good player, but he's still, compared to those two, a depth piece and a bunch of crap beyond that. I don't believe that crew is a title favorite right now, even with the Warriors dead for a year. I know the league is wide open. I don't, in this moment, see it. Will they get a third guy like Kyrie, like Kemba Walker, somebody else? Well, that changes things. But right now, what do you make of the short-term future in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that as constructed that there are a lot of real problems, but I think that they can fill a lot of those problems. If I were them, I would not go after the max guy. I would try to fill out this roster with depth, with guys who can defend, with guys who can shoot. I liked what they did in the draft. They had a second-round pick that they used on Talen Horton-Tucker out of Iowa State. I honestly think that guy's going to come in and be able to contribute right away, probably off the bench. He's just a really, really good defender. I just think that at this point, you have enough star talent. Like, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Like, I don't think you need to go out and overpay for Kemba Walker when you could bring in, guys who can shoot, guys who can defend, guys who space the floor around those two, like, superstars that you already have in place. So, I mean, that's what I would do. But to your point, I mean, I think they might be the second best team in Los Angeles if Kawhi goes to the Clippers, and especially if the Clippers end up getting another guy like a Horford. Like those.
Horford, by the way, Woj reports is an option for the Pelicans as well right now. So that who knows? The market may be expanding.
I mean, this offseason is just chaos, man.
It really is.
Just absurd. Yeah. So I mean, but I think that Lakers team, they've got some holes. They've got enough star talent now. I would just try to fill the holes. Like, you've got all this. People talk about how they don't have enough cap space, but they don't have enough cap space for a max guy. They have enough cap space to go out and build this team into a legit contender, into a team that could win a championship, especially in a down year with the Warriors. They could do it, and we'll see what Rob Pelinka manages to pull off. But they definitely have options, and I will be fascinated to see what direction they go. After all the chaos, if they're still able to build a championship roster after all of the stuff that they went through this year, honestly, that'll just be genuinely really impressive, just given all the dysfunction and everything that we learned once the season came to a close. But
we can wrap with this, just for the sake of devil's advocate, because I gave my opinion. Do you think the C's should have made the gamble for Davis? Given that it is it's a star-driven league, historically, you need stars to win aside from that Pistons team. And right now, Boston does not have any. The Raptors gambled on Kawhi Leonard. It worked out. He may leave, but Toronto still enjoyed its first title parade. What do you think?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm right there with you. I mean, I think Davis made it entirely too clear that he planned to leave for the Celtics to make a move like that, especially given everything they would have to give up. I'm certainly not the first one to make this point, but imagine losing Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, and Anthony Davis in the course of a calendar year.
Right.
That is just a devastating blow for a franchise. You can't. I mean, that's the kind of blow that sets you back for a decade. And the Celtics team has, Wick talked about it in that clip. There's still so much promise on this team, and it doesn't feel like it for Celtics fans because it feels like the sky is falling. Kyrie's out the door. Horford's probably out the door. Baines is gone. All these guys who were contributors last year and who were stars last year are gone. Feels like the sky is falling, but the team is still really promising, and they still have tons of young talent in the Memphis pick. And I mean, look, there's no guarantee that if the Celtics went completely all in, if the Celtics offered Tatum, Brown, and the Memphis pick, the Pelicans probably take that deal, but maybe the Lakers throw in more stuff. The Lakers put so much on the table, it would have been difficult for the Celtics to match that deal, even if they offered literally everything. So, and I mean, if you offer everything, then you have Anthony Davis and Terry. That's not a championship team. That's not the Raptors. The Raptors were able to do that because they had a really good team in place, around DeRozan, so that when they traded DeRozan for a much better player, that team was then really good. The Celtics wouldn't have had that same setup. It just wasn't. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, no matter how much people want to make it that way. So, no, I'm right there with you. I think that trading for Davis would have been a pretty major mistake, given that he wasn't willing to. Not only was he not willing to commit, he wouldn't even say that he would consider committing. Like, that dude did not want to be in Boston, and he made that abundantly clear.
So does Dad. Even going back to the trade deadline, it's been out there for a long time. I said I was going to end, but I just saw this headline that obviously you have not seen because we're talking, but it's entertaining. Just speaks to how stupid this offseason is already, and that we're still. It's never. I will contend. I don't think you would disagree. We have never had an NBA offseason that has been this crazy ahead of free agency. I know people like to look back at the LeBron and the decision and waiting for that, but that was like free agency was underway. We have never the amount of just ridiculousness, of silliness that has existed even ahead of the draft, and then where we are right now, still, like you said, 9-10 days out from free agency is ridiculous. So Ian Begley in New York wrote that some people around Kawhi Leonard still see New York as a potential destination for the Finals MVP. I bring that up not to discuss Kawhi, but just to spin it back to Kyrie quickly. If the Brooklyn thing, and I don't know, I didn't read the article. I don't know if I think he's talking about the Knicks and not New York on the whole. If the Brooklyn thing is true, that they wouldn't want Kyrie alone if that ends up being the reality. And I know Durant is reportedly still thinking about the Nets and Knicks and not just automatically opting in. And there's been talk of the sign and trade with Golden State. So there's a zillion things on the table. But would that be a logical fit? Kyrie goes to the Knicks. Kawhi goes to the Knicks. Those guys are together. Nets are out of the equation. And Kyrie ends up punting from one to the other?
I mean, that team would be really good. I mean, like, it's interesting to think about it in terms of like the Cavaliers teams, just like the ways that Kawhi, is similar and differs from LeBron. Like he's similar to LeBron in that he's, very strong, and obviously he's a versatile three who, at LeBron's peak, obviously he defended really well, and they're different in terms of their offensive styles for sure. But it would be really interesting to see Kyrie going back to being, the number two guy. Man, that would be an interesting fit. I think they'd be really good. I think any team that gets Kawhi at this point is just going to be really, really good. And Kyrie is, I think he would fill in some gaps just in terms of, being a guy who could go get a bucket if the team was really focusing on Kawhi. I mean, I think those two would pair up really nicely that way. It's definitely intriguing. If I were Kawhi, I would still be pretty focused on either the Clippers or the Raptors. I mean, Raptors just won a title. Can't really argue with that. And I think the Clippers have the pieces to build something really good around him. And I do think that a lot of this New York stuff, some of these guys would be taking a major gamble by going to the Knicks. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what they want. But for a guy like Kawhi, it feels like the other options are good enough that would be a difficult sell. But yeah, I mean, if Kawhi and Kyrie paired up, I think they'd be a really talented duo, and they would definitely be like a contender in the Eastern Conference. That's for sure.
I'm just looking forward to, after all this, Kawhi goes back to Toronto, Durant opts in, Clay re-signs with Golden State. All these guys just wind up staying put. That would be something. But Tom Westerholm from Mass Live, I know you're incredibly busy, obviously, in the wake of the draft and free agency coming, so I appreciate you giving me some time here. And this was good, man. A lot of good insight.
Of course, man. Anytime.
This is what I mean. This is why the show came out on a Friday and not wait until Sunday, because there are constantly push notifications all the time. It's just another rumor, another thing that you want to get into and you want to attempt to dissect. But we have gone on too long, as we tend to do. This time of year it gets just a little silly. Show brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Use the promo code CLNS50. Get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Show is also brought to you in part by Quip. Go to getquip.com/Celtics to get your first refill pack for free. Thanks again to Tom, my producer Evan. Thanks to Nick, Larry, John, everybody at CLNS Media. This is the silly season. Keep following along. At Adam M. Kaufman, turn those alerts on.
Raptors just won a title. Can't really argue with that. And I think the Clippers have the pieces to build something really good around him. And I do think that a lot of this New York stuff, some of these guys would be taking a major gamble by going to the Knicks. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what they want. But for a guy like Kawhi, it feels like the other options are good enough that would be a difficult sell. But yeah, I mean, if Kawhi and Kyrie paired up, I think they'd be a really talented duo, and they would definitely be like a contender in the Eastern Conference. That's for sure.
I'm just looking forward to, after all this, Kawhi goes back to Toronto, Durant opts in, Clay re-signs with Golden State. You know, all these guys just wind up staying put. That would be something. But Tom Westerholm from Mass Live, I know you're incredibly busy, obviously, in the wake of the draft and free agency coming, so I appreciate you giving me some time here. And this was good, man. A lot of good insight.
Of course, man. Anytime.
This is what I mean. This is why the show came out on a Friday and not wait until Sunday, because there are constantly push notifications all the time. It's just another rumor, another thing that you want to get into and you want to attempt to dissect. But we have gone on too long, as we tend to do. This time of year, it gets just a little silly. Show brought to you by betonline.ag. Go to clnsmedia.com/CelticsBeat. Use the promo code CLNS50. Get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Show is also brought to you in part by Quip.